Next, let's create the screw holes for our bracket. So we'll come down to our bracket part and edit that in context. I'll go to the plane that we used to create our bracket and create a sketch right on that original plane. And rather than draw a circle, all I need to do is grab one of these edges, make sure that no external references is checked, and then come over and convert entities. And as we know by now, it's going to warn us before we do that. We hit OK. We end up with an unconstrained circle, but it is in the correct location, which is good. We'll right-click on that circle and lock it down so we can't accidentally move it. So we say Make Fixed. Now this thing turns black, and now it's locked down. I won't accidentally move that anywhere I don't want it to be. We'll change it to Construction Geometry, grab our Circle tool, and draw a circle anywhere within there of 4 millimeters, let's say. I think that should be fine, and we can adjust that later if we need to. Next, I'll go up to my Features and do an Extruded Cut, and cut straight through my part body. That should be fine. And now we have a hole, which is perfect. But we need 8 holes, not just one, and so to create the rest of those, let's right-click on our bracket and open that up in a new window all by itself. Now, I've been running into a bug here in SolidWorks 2013. I'm going to hide this plane. Let's actually hide these sketches too, because they're kind of bothering me. And the thing that I'm running into is that circular patterning around this construction line, for some reason, is not working. If you run into that problem in your file, then head up to Reference Geometry, Axis, click on this curve, and hit OK. Now that seems completely extra, and it is. You shouldn't have to create an extra axis in order to pattern around it. You should be able to use that sketch curve. However, there seems to be a bug keeping that from working. So I'll grab my axis, head up to Linear Pattern, drop it down, and do a circular pattern. Under Features to Pattern down below, I'll just zoom in and click on that hole, because that's what we're going to pattern. Make sure that the angle is set to 360 degrees and that we are creating 8 instances that are equally spaced around our circumference. We hit OK, and we're left with our 8 holes in the correct places. Perfect. Close that up. Back in the assembly, you see that our holes line up perfectly with the rest of our bracket, or with the transducer, I should say. And now we can actually move on to something a little bit, hopefully, a little bit more interesting. I'll just hide that axis because it's kind of ugly, and move on. So one more thing, let's just add those screws. Now this is cosmetic, of course, but we downloaded this bolt from McMaster-Carr. Now let's just drag that up into our assembly here and drop it. And once again, you should be editing the top level assembly when you do that. If you happen to be editing a part in context, it'll give you an error message. But I'm in the assembly, and I've dropped in my part. I'll zoom in here. Let's just mate this into place. I'll grab my mate tool. Let's just mate the barrel axis of this to the axis of our hole. And right now it's facing the wrong direction, right? So right here in this little pop-up, there's a Flip Mate Alignment button. I can click that, and it'll flip us straight around. That's perfect. We hit OK, and we can add a new mate. This time we'll add a mate from the inside face of our screw, or our screw head, to the outside face of our bracket. And now the thing is locked in place. Now obviously there's something wrong with the bracket as they've modeled it. They haven't given us enough room for any kind of a head to be on here. So I'm going to assume that in the actual real-world subwoofer, there's probably a cutaway in this outer rim. There usually is anyway, to make room for the head of a screw that's going in there. Anyway, we have this one. Let's exit the mate tool. Let's create the other 8. And we do that in exactly the same way that we created the pattern of holes. So we'll go up to our linear component pattern and drop that down, and underneath it there is a circular component pattern that's visible when we're editing an assembly. And under Components to Pattern, I'll just zoom in here and click anywhere on our screw. That's the component that we want. And in the parameters, we have an axis, and we can choose the center line of our master model. That's just fine. And then we can make sure that that is set to 360 degrees and that we have 8 of them, and that equal spacing is checked. We hit OK, and we now have our 8 bolts in the correct places. And hopefully, in real life, that will work. Now, clearly, we haven't added any kind of detail for this, so you can see that obviously, for example, the threads are too big for the hole that we created on our bracket, and we would have to build in some kind of threaded sleeve for these, some tapped sleeve for these to screw into. But that's a whole other thing, and we're not going to get into that at the moment. So this is all we need for the time being, and we'll go ahead and get into building some of the other pieces of the housing.